Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the penultimate Open Courtauld Hour of the summer term. My name is Alex Bovey. I'm head of research at the Courtauld Institute, and it has been one of the highlights of lockdown for me to be able to put this hour-long of art historical conversation with my wonderful Courtauld colleagues and with so many collaborators. We've got a great episode lined up for you this evening, and I hope that you will join in the conversation. Tonight we're talking about past orders, art and social scenes. It seems very appropriate now. I think approximately 75% of the country has gone down to the Dorset coast. So we're in a kind of national gear change, which is the cause of joy, but also a lot of anxiety and concern. So it seems timely that we're turning to this subject, social scenes. And before I welcome my co-host and cherished colleague Leila Brumbra to tell us more about this evening's episode, I'll just ask you to remember to tweet us or Insta us at Courtauld Res with the hashtag Open Courtauld Hour. And you can pitch questions to us and to the speakers this evening via that channel. And we'll also be available on email throughout on research forum at courtauld.ac.uk. And with that, I'm going to hope that Leila materializes. I think not for the first time. I'll share with you a certain amount of anxiety. Are you there, Leila?
Yes, because, I am.
We've had a kind of national internet outage, at least in the bit of South London that Leila and I live in. So Leila, I can't see you, but I can hear you. Can I hand over to you?
I can see you, but you are a little bit blurred, but that could be, again, my internet, because I have Virgin Media internet. Anyway, so Alex, you know how much I love the pub, not to live up to my stereotype that is Scottish in any way. But like last week, I wanted to contextualise where we were coming from today in our conversations about drinking culture, nightlife, socialising and art. So this Tuesday we had a pretty historic, apparently last, daily coronavirus press conference where Boris Johnson announced that we're opening our pubs, bars, restaurants, museums and galleries on the 4th of July. And with pubs being the first place to be closed in the UK's approach to tackling COVID-19, this episode begins and ends by delving into the life of London's favourite artwork and the Courtauld's most iconic painting, Manet's A Bar at Folies-Bergère. So this artwork is so iconic, in fact, and one of my friends told me that she included it as a decoration in her game of Animal Crossing, which is something that's become really popular in lockdown amongst my friends anyway. So this evening we are working from the point of view that this artwork has taken on new significance in light of Boris's announcement this week, but also in an age of isolation and social distancing. But it's also important when we're thinking about pubs and to think that they are also have and always will be sites of artistic experimentation. So they're sites of drag performance, musical, theatrical and visual experimentation, and often political activism. But pubs have been thought of as unsavoury and places of disrepute for the reason that they can actually have the power to challenge binary thinking. They're allowing people to interact with and engage with identities, ideologies and sexualities in quite a lot of ways that are seen at odds with what is deemed respectable. So tonight we wanted to think about, with the help of our experts, the role of the pub in art, subject matter, its genesis, and actually as a site of art historical dissemination and learning.
Leila, thank you very much. And I've got a bit of feedback that my internet is glitchy, so I apologize for that. What can you say? It seems ironic that that we're unlocking down, and yet of all nights, we've all kind of been afflicted. And so please let us know what you think on social media at Courtauld Res. And I'm now going to introduce my colleague Karen Serre, who is that wasn't my internet glitching, that was me. Although Leila's kind of frozen, so I'm suddenly kind of anxious about this whole thing. Karen is a curator of paintings in the Courtauld Institute Gallery, and has been instrumental in so many of the amazing projects that we've been doing while the Courtauld Gallery has been closed, with exhibitions in Paris and in Japan. She has a very distinguished academic career that goes from the École de Louvre back to the Sorbonne, to the Courtauld, and she returned to the Courtauld in her present role in 2012. So Karen, are you there? And can I say hello to you?
I am indeed. It's such a pleasure to be here with you tonight.
Well, that's wonderful. And I gather that your internet has been extremely on off, shall we say, all day. Is that right?
I'm afraid so. But I think we're gonna power through.
We're going to power through, and I think what we're going to do is come back to you live from your study after we've heard your talk. So we'll hand it over to Grace, who's great.
Thank you so much for your invitation to speak this evening about one of the most famous and beloved paintings in the Courtauld collection, Édouard Manet's Bar de Folies-Bergère. It's a painting that I found myself returning to, albeit virtually, during the lockdown as pubs and restaurants were closing down, as we've said. I didn't think I would miss socializing so much, and just looking at this painting makes me hear the bustle of people and the clicking of glasses and laughter and conversation. It also made me wonder why we go to pubs and to restaurants in the first place, as we've been doing for so long, and how they're such an important form of social cohesion. And this painting is particularly fitting because Manet was painting at a pivotal time in the development of social spaces in Paris. The city had been transformed by the cutting through of large avenues, the boulevard, where people strolled and shopped, and also with the creation of parks and open spaces where they could gather. Some classes had recently gained more leisure time, and places of entertainment were created to cater for this growing bourgeoisie and the wealthy middle class, to which Manet himself belonged. He never actually joined the Impressionist movement, but the fact that he chose to represent scenes of contemporary life rather than history or religious subjects of the type favored by the Academy of Fine Arts was an important influence on the Impressionists. I think that for Manet, social spaces represented a fascinating world in miniature. And I want to show you two other paintings by him depicting these social spaces. So one is in a public garden where people have gathered to listen to a band. It's the wonderful Musique in the Tuileries at the National Gallery in London. And in that same collection, this view of an interior of a café concert where Manet has represented not only the customers, but also the staff and the performers that you see in the background. So what was this place, the Folies-Bergère, and why did Manet choose to represent it? It initially opened in May 1869, but the Franco-Prussian War broke out, and it's really only in 1872 that it was refurbished and renamed. So when Manet was painting, it had only been opened for about 10 years. Its name derives from the name for an extravagant kind of pleasure pavilion on the grounds of an estate, and it became the generic name for a place of entertainment. And there were many of such folies in Paris, and to distinguish them, they were named after their owners or the streets where they were located. So in this case, the nearby Rue Bergère. So the Folies-Bergère still exists today, but moved from its original site slightly, and it's been refurbished many times. So unfortunately, the interior that Manet knew has been lost. Here I'm showing you its facade in the early 20th century and its facade today. So we know the decor only through Manet's paintings and through posters of the time. And you can see that it tried to be high-end with all of these extravagant chandeliers and gold and marble everywhere. And it targeted a wealthy clientele, although actually there was a great mix of people. And indeed, we know that cafes and restaurants are places where people gather to share political and just ideas in general. And in the 19th century, writers and artists hung out in cafes and shared and showed their work there. So for example, Van Gogh's first exhibition took place at a community restaurant that he frequented. And 19th century cafes have been described as the primary theater of everyday life. And I think that everyday life is certainly what we have lost at the moment. And so we've also lost this wonderful theater of human life. But Paris didn't only have cafes and restaurants. As I said, places of entertainment multiplied. There were cafés-concerts, music halls, operas, and hybrids of all of this, with the Folies-Bergère being the most prominent. And its entertainment included ballet and operetta, as we can see advertised on the poster, but also circus acts and animals, and so there was a great variety. There was a stage, but in fact, much of the spectacle happened in the room, in seeing and being seen. As we can see from the poster, there's and also behind the barmaid, there's a mezzanine where there was a walkway and people moved around, going from group to group and from couch to couch, and also from bar to bar. And you can see one of these bars in the lower right-hand corner of the poster. And so that's why Manet's painting is called a bar at the Folies-Bergère, because there were many such bars. I also want to look at some of the elements that Manet chose to depict, because in fact they were quite meaningful and important, and contemporary audiences would have understood their symbolism. They weren't chosen at random, but they were actually very new and novelty items in a way, and so they represented a modernity that was very important for Manet. I'm always struck by the stunning still life that is painted or kind of, evolves and unrolls around the foreground of this work. So on the left, you have a group of bottles, and the label of one of them actually has Manet's signature and the date. Next to it is a beer bottle that we'll come back to, and then a group of 4 champagne bottles with their wonderful gold foil. And champagne was a very recent addition to the kind of mass market. It had previously been reserved for the elites. But at the time, thanks to better railway connections with the Champagne region and technological advances on the fermentation process of the wine itself, it meant that it could be created and produced in greater volumes. So this was a new kind of opportunity for this growing bourgeoisie to have access to. On the other side is this cut glass bowl, which holds, a viewer tells us, candied mandarins, probably also infused in some kind of liquor, which explains their presence on the bar. And here I'm showing you such a glass bowl that was brought in by one of the visitors in Japan, actually, in our recent exhibition there, who kind of recognized an object. And so thanks to her, we know that this is from the company Baccarat, and was a new item in the 19th century. Next to it is this bottle of Friso mint liquor. And then next to it is the very recognizable red triangle logo of Bass Pale Ale. It's the first time a logo is represented in a painting, and indeed also the beginning of trademarks at all. And the fact that it's an imported beer also added to its cachet, because importing beer was not actually straightforward. It could spoil, and it was only done, therefore, at certain times of the year. So it was a bit like champagne. It was considered kind of an exotic and special drink. And beer was not the only thing that was imported. The acts were as well, and foreign performers were much more kind of attractive for this audience. And here I'm showing you a poster for the American trapeze artist Leona Dare, who performed at the Folies-Bergère in 1877, so a few years before Manet's painting. And her red boots kind of echo the green ones that appear on the upper left-hand corner of the painting. But I want to stress to finish that Manet did not represent the Folies-Bergère in a very kind of straightforward and factual way. He represented an idea of it. He did make sketches there, but the painting itself was executed in his studio. A table was set up and an actual barmaid from the Folies-Bergère came to pose. And indeed, when you think about it, the bar is a bit weird. No bottles are open, there are no glasses, and viewers famously complained that the champagne wasn't chilled. So amidst all of this joy and bustle, Manet has introduced a sense of unease, which is most evident in the strange construction of the space, with the mismatched reflections of the bottles and the barmaid as well in the large mirror behind her. In the face of the mysterious man in the upper right-hand corner, and of course in the inscrutable expression. I think what I love most about this painting is the fact that it's completely timeless and completely of its time. It shows the excitement that ran through Parisian society at that period, but also in a way alludes to the dark underbelly of these spaces, like contemporary authors did. So some of them mentioning the fact that barmaids sometimes made additional money by selling themselves in prostitution to clients, which slightly changes our view of the painting. And Manet certainly conveys that unease and the weird conversation or transaction that seems to be taking place between the barmaid and the man. And yet, a bar at the Folies-Bergère is also completely timeless. One visitor once told me that Manet had perfectly captured how she felt at the end of one of her shifts at the pub. And it's undoubtedly why it still speaks to us so strongly today, and why it's also the perfect painting with which to start this Courtauld Open Hour.
That was great. Thank you so much. And also good that we did a pre-recording, because both of our internet has been terrible today. That was amazing, especially because I think we speak about this artwork so often and you feel like there's not really much else to say about it. But when you think about it, the lens through what we're going through and how bars, etc., will adapt to this new normal, it's really interesting. So we have two questions. I will just get them up. So the first one is from Fern. She would like to know why Manet has put a signature on the wine bottle and not the champagne or beer. Does it say anything about how he saw himself?
Ooh, that's a good question. I never thought about that, actually, if he was more a wine person than a beer person. Though actually, as I said, the beer was considered much more exotic than the French wine or the French champagne. The wine is the one thing that we haven't quite identified. So I don't know if it was more generic or if we just kind of need to do further research on it. But no, I think it's mostly because just because the label is kind of just more straightforward and a little bit more discreet. And as I said, weirdly, wine is probably the less exotic item there. So he's both there and kind of in the corner.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've never really thought about that either. The other question that we have is, someone would like to know why you think this work is the most popular work. You did say about how people really associate with the barmaid, especially people like me who've worked in many bars, and that look of just let me go home. But is there anything else you think why people might love it so much?
I think it's one of those, I mean, Manet was so good at doing this. It's so tantalizing. You just want to, it's like a murder mystery of some sort. You just want to understand its meaning. And it can have so many meaning. I mean, there's been so many interpretations of what's going on. And what I find slightly reassuring is that people at the time were utterly baffled by it. So it's not just us kind of later on. And so Manet really meant to kind of, scramble clues. So the same, on the one hand, he really gives you kind of clear, so recognizable items and this recognizable place that was one of the most popular in Paris. But at the same time, it's a really, it's a very mysterious work, and you're, everybody is still trying, and the curators included, trying to figure out what exactly he meant to say. So I think that's where it appeals still lie.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Karen, and thank you for taking the time today to come and just answer those questions, and also preparing the presentation beforehand. Thank you.
It was a huge pleasure.
Great. So I'm now going to introduce everyone to our second speaker of the session. We have Florence Ostende. Florence is a curator at the Barbican and curated the show-stopping exhibition Into the Night, Cabarets and Clubs in Modern Art, which she will revisit this evening. She's worked at a massive range of arts institutions, from Dallas Contemporary, Palais de Tokyo, MACBA to the Pompidou, and her writing appears in many publications and periodicals as well, such as The Frieze. Unfortunately, as well, due to the blackout of Virgin Media and also 4G across southwest London today, Florence is unable to give her prepared presentation. Instead, we are going to play a short film that summarises the exhibition, and then we're going to do a Q&A with Florence after, where she's calling into the webinar, so you won't get to see her, but she is there. So if you have any questions for her, please do send them over via Twitter or Research Forum events.
The idea of the exhibition is to offer a journey into the most exciting artistic scenes of the avant-garde. And it's really trying to provide an alternative history of the way modern art has been written. Music, visual arts, design, architecture, poetry and literature all merge into the spaces of the cabarets and clubs. Cabarets and clubs were meeting places, and this is where discussion and debates amongst artists took place. What makes the cabarets, cafes and clubs so exciting is the fact that they were places that were really different from the museum, from the studio, from the academy. It really offered a platform to really free themselves from societal rules. We've been trying to think about the history of cabarets and clubs and modern art as not only centered around Paris, New York, Vienna and Berlin. We try to expand those boundaries and really trying to reveal dynamic scenes in Nigeria, the Mumbai Club in the 60s, Rush 29 in Tehran in the mid-60s, but also Mexico in the 20s. Mexico is a very interesting section because it reveals one of the most important avant-garde movements of the 20s, but also one of the most rarely seen movements. We all know about Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, but the movement of the Estudiantismo became very important in the years following the Mexican Revolution. Writers, sculptors and painters all met in a cafe that was called the Café des Nadiers. They were trying to break the rules of language, trying to think about the impact of technology, of speed. Mexico was growing at the time, was becoming a very big city. But at the same time, they were also very respectful of tradition. So what's really interesting in this section and is really the kind of meeting point between tradition and modernity, and how these artists have used the place of the Café des Nadiers, which means nobody's cafe because nobody was really hanging out there. They've used that space to create. Inside the Cine Dancing, there will be a very exciting series of live jazz events curated by Mark Kavuma, a very talented young trumpeter who will bring a lot of musicians and music to the space when the exhibition is open in the evening.
Thank you. What a tantalizing film. So Florence, do I have you on the line now?
Hello.
Hey, hey, thank you very much for tuning in and for sharing that wonderful and tantalizing film. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you very well, thank you.
Yeah, so you've been knocked out badly by the great internet failure of July 2020, haven't you?
Absolutely. Today of all days, it had to happen. It's really frustrating, but so happy to be with you tonight. I wouldn't have wanted to miss that. So thank you so much for your invitation.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and for agreeing to talk with us about your show. I have a deep personal love of the Barbican. I mean, I love it so much that I got married there to my first and indeed current husband, and the kind of sense of it as a place of celebration and kind of bacchanalian celebration is something that is pretty fundamental to my sense of London as a place. And it's really interesting to me that during this exhibition about art and club scenes, that the Barbican kind of transformed itself into a site of collaboration and experimentation on this front. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about the kind of creative production and collaboration that was involved in that transformation.
Well, you mean in the sections of the exhibition?
Yeah.
Yes, well, absolutely. The show was all about collaboration in a way, and that was what, in a way, drew me into this exploration of the cabarets, the clubs, the bars, in the sense that they became sites of collaborations and collective authorship for artists to, in a way, create forms of artistic expressions that they would not necessarily have created in the context of the studio or in the context of the academy. That was something that I felt was really important to stage in the exhibition, and to really think about how space and the different art forms could be used by the artist to celebrate and but also talk about very important subjects. It was an exhibition that was trying to talk about, for instance, the current debate regarding transcultural and transnational networks of modernist art, the way new modes of circulation between scenes were happening at a global scale, but also how some of these clubs, like for instance the Mumbari Club in Nigeria in the early 60s, became laboratories for post-colonial artistic practices. One particular example that I felt was really important in relation to your question about this site of transformation and the idea of collaboration was the importance of publishing in print, of journals and pamphlets and various modes of publications that were produced by the artists in these clubs, and we displayed many of them in the exhibition. It's interesting to note that the birth of the Chat Noir in Paris in 1881 happened the year of the freedom of press. So it was also making connections with the social and political context, showing that those spaces were not created, funded, and celebrated by the artist in isolation from what was happening at the time. The Chat Noir Shadow Theatre, for instance, was very much operating as a newsroom of the time. The Shadow Theatre was displaying all kinds of plays that were about myth, but also the current political context. So the idea of collaboration, you were right, were absolutely central to the show.
Thank you. I mean, that what in the film you surfaced the ways that you wanted to take the visitor on a global journey, and you mentioned that you wanted the exhibition to kind of act as an alternative history. And I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about the incorporation of pieces from Nigeria, Tehran, Mexico.
Absolutely, that was really really important, because a lot of the literature that I found when starting this research about the cultural history of cabarets, cafés, and clubs obviously was mainly centered around Vienna, Paris, London, New York, with the Chat Noir being the obvious birthplace of the what we call the artistic cabaret, right? And it was really important to show that actually this was a global movement. Many other places, such as in Mexico, as I was explaining in the film, with the studentist movement, were gathering in the Café des Nadiers, and that became a really important place for for the avant-garde. The protagonist, Manuel Maples-Arce, was calling for tabula rasa of all the past values and tradition, and he wrote this beautiful manifesto that is really connected to the history of this cafe, where he was calling Chopin to the electric chair. So the Mexico was a very important section, but also the Mumbari Club in Nigeria, not only in Ibadan, but also in Oshogbo. The exhibition was showing how the club was a platform for many range of activities, an open air dance and theater performances that was featuring really like groundbreaking Yoruba operas by Duro Ladipo, but also Fela Kuti's very early performances. There was also Rush 29 in Tehran, which was the last section of the exhibition in '66. An amazing creative space for avant-garde painters, poets, and musicians and filmmakers that were mainly led by an incredible artist called Parviz Tanavoli. We displayed many of his assemblages with electric lights that were, for some of them, displayed inside the club. These works were very much echoing a movement, an important movement in Tehran at the time, the Satakane movement, that was combining traditional practices and modernist aesthetics. So this was a very, very important narrative for us to really go beyond the boundaries of the Western modernist narrative.
Florence, congratulations on a wonderful exhibition, and hearing you talk about it and looking at the still, I think, in many ways transgressive works that you showed really whets my appetite for the reopening of the Barbican and other galleries. And good luck as you move into this new phase of reopening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and have a good evening. Good luck with your internet as well. We're now going to switch gear a little, but only a little, and introduce Dr. Matt Lodder, who's senior lecturer in art history and theory, and also director of American Studies at the University of Essex. Matt is a kind of polymathic scholar with a wide range of chronological and geographical interests, and they center on the application of art historical methods of Western tattooing from the 17th century to the present, and also on those kinds of bodily modification practices now, including tongue splitting implants and other procedures of that kind. And he's published on feminist theories of pornography and the intersections of consent, culture, and the law. And tonight we're going to ask him really to focus on a project that he led when he was at the Association for Art History, and which continues. So Matt, if you can switch your camera on, I hope you'll appear on my screen, and I'll hand over to you.
Great.
Hey, there you are.
Cool. Hi, thanks Alex. It's so good to be involved with this, and thank you to Ayla and all the team who put this together. It's a real privilege to actually be speaking to people, right? Because the only difference between an artist or an academic career and a mania is communicating the things we know to other people. So thank you for saving me from my own madness. In fact, I was supposed to, one of the first things that got cancelled for me at the beginning of lockdown was a talk for this series at the Royal Academy, Bottoms Up, A History of Hot Food, Drinks and Drinking. Sadly got cancelled. I was going to be talking about soft drinks. I wanted to talk, for example, about the Brazilian artist Silvio Morales' insertion into ideological circuits project from 1970, where he put political slogans, including instructions on how to make Molotov cocktails onto Coca-Cola bottles, and then put them back into the kind of capitalist network post the 1964 coup in Brazil. But because tonight is all about pubs, I'm going to switch gears and not talk about soft drinks, but talk a bit about pubs themselves. If you want to know more about actually the intersections of art history and drink, the work of particularly Edward Payne is really interesting. Ed Payne did a panel at the 2013 AAH conference called The Imaginary Drinker, and there's lots of interesting, this is on his ResearchGate, and you can see some other speakers in that panel. So there's lots of crossover, right, between art history and the study of boozing, but I wanted to get more kind of, place-based, at least for the first section of this talk, to a pub I visited in February, oh so long ago, those halcyon days of February 2020, and it's a pub on 44 Clemens-Schülerstraße in Hamburg. And it's quite unassuming, but I went there for historical reasons. This is what it used to look like. This is a photo of it from back in 1959. And the reason I went to visit there is because I was in Hamburg to check out an exhibition put on by my friend Ole Whitman of the history of the most important tattooer in Germany in the first part of the 20th century, a guy called Christian Wahrlich, and you can see his name on that, the front of the pub as it was in the 1950s. So essentially, between about 1919 and about 1964, when Wahrlich died, that pub was also a tattoo studio. In fact, Wahrlich describes it as beginning as a pub with a small tattooing business, and by the time of his death, it was a tattooing shop with a small pub business. And I'm really interested in these intersections for loads of reasons, which I haven't got time to go into in depth here, really. But I think it's a kind of interesting sign that these kind of marginalized kinds of art practice are happening kind of intersected with public houses. I mean, literally here, you could sort of queue up and get yourself a pint while you waited to get tattooed. It began, actually, Wahrlich began sort of tattooing in this restaurant. It was originally a restaurant run by this guy called Robert Schnorf. And you can see there, along with the Frühstückslokal, the local breakfast, there's tattoo designs in the window. But very, very shortly after that, Wahrlich took it over entirely. In fact, here's a customer peering into the window. So, I've been as Alex said, I've been interested in these intersections between tattooing and art. This particular kind of work, as it was inspired by the work of my friend Ole. But it tells a kind of bigger story, I think. The fact that kind of art history has ignored the kinds of things that I've been writing about for so long, I think is indicative of a kind of cultural problem, right? There's a kind of sense that art history is a certain kind of thing, certainly in the kind of wider public, right? We haven't done a very good job as an industry of telling a wider story. So this is where I wanted to change things up. The bar also, as a quick aside, the bar was also is now a gay bar, right? Which also tells you something about marginalized spaces, called Toon per Star. So to try and kind of fight through this image problem, I wanted to try and bring art history to the people, so to speak, grandiosely. And back in 2011, I began doing lectures up in a pub in Camden, not in a back room, not in a far away a space that you had to kind of queue to get into, but actually in the bar. And I figured that a pub space would be a really, really great space to try and break down these barriers between the kind of public interest in art and this kind of perception of our profession. It's something which has a good history. This goes back to at least the 17th century. This guy telling a story of getting drunk, but in the common house where the commune meets to deal with public business and education. And of course, we find it in painting too. This is Leger's still life with a beer mug, right? The world seems so much clearer and more interesting through the distorting gaze of a frothy mug of beer. So we had, for a couple of years, while I worked at the AAH before I got my current job, we had kind of packed crowds in the front bar of the Monarch, and quite often with people kind of wandering off the street, off Camden High Street, wanting to get a beer, wondering what the hell was going on, and kind of staying, and then coming back in future weeks. We had some very kind of, straightforward art history from some very senior people. We had some kind of more off-the-wall avant-garde stuff too. But I think it was a really good way of us starting to break down the barriers between audience and art history as a discipline that is, I think, otherwise quite badly served. I'll finish up just with this quick anecdote. One of our speakers, actually, Catherine Daunt, who's now at the British Museum, was doing a collaborative doctoral award at the time in the National Portrait Gallery about workshop portraits from the Jacobean period. I guess in some senses not the kind of thing which would immediately appeal to a mass market audience, but it turns out that some of the images she was talking about actually were copies of which were hanging on the wall of the pub. There were copies of these Tudor pictures on the wall of the Manet. And it was really, really great to talk about, in quite a serious but fun and accessible way, about these images that are otherwise kind of background decoration for a high street pub, and talk about their really, really interesting and important kind of art historical significance. So I'll just finish up by saying, finish up with a slight plug as well. During lockdown, while I haven't been able to go to the pub myself, I've been making this short film of my exhibition. So before you go to the pub, or even if you come back from the pub drunk, a little film I made of my latest exhibition, which is currently closed, is on BBC iPlayer, and you can search it there. Thank you very much.
That was great, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us. Actually, when I started programming this event, I was kind of inspired by my favourite all-time class when I was doing my undergrad at Glasgow, which was, so I did theatre and history of art, and one class was space, place and performance, and we did it all over the place. But one day we actually did it in the pub, and we ended up doing loads of sambuca at the end. And everyone, like, I come from a medical family, and most of my friends at uni were medics, and they were just like, "Are you sure that you're doing work?" And I was like, "I promise we're doing work." It really did help, and it started loads of conversations, and people were really thinking about the way they performed themselves and differently in a pub. So yeah, it's really great to hear from you about that too. So we have one question from the audience, from someone called Linda, and she's asking, what is it about the space of public houses that helps democratize subjects such as art history?
Well, I think the first thing to say is it's not entirely democratic, of course, because there are plenty of people that don't enjoy pubs or can't, for various reasons, go into pubs. So it's not a kind of panacea. But what I found is that just a lot of the kind of distance is collapsed, right? And pubs are places you go to have a good time. So that kind of feeling that often is generated by museums, and I've talked about this in other places, where you're like, oh, I've got to learn here, I've got to kind of pay attention. And if you don't understand, and if you feel a bit kind of overwhelmed by the experience of a museum, it can be difficult to kind of ask questions. If you had a pint or two, it becomes much easier to kind of ask the questions, to have a conversation afterwards, to chat to people about, about the things you're inspired by. So I think there's just something, this is sort of what we were talking about earlier on in regards to Folies-Bergère. There's something about these spaces which are built for the kind of conviviality and conversation that I think academia often kind of squeezes out of subjects. And it was really, really nice. One speaker, Sam Gathercole, who teaches at Croydon, said during his talk, he basically gave a lecture that he would give to his students. And he said, "My students never laugh in the right places at my jokes." And of course, in the pub, everyone's having a good time and having a laugh. So it's just a really nice way to make people feel comfortable. And if it is democratic, it's because there's not this kind of expert standing on a kind of pedestal, but they're very present, they're very there. It's very conversational, and that really worked. I should mention that after I left, the series did continue to some degree. It's been going on in Bristol, actually. And the Association for Art History told me that if anyone who's listening who would be interested in running an art history in the pub, to email me. My email address is mlodder@essex.ac.uk, and I can put you in touch with the association, and they're really, really keen for people to take these on, and we'll help you how to do that if that's what you'd like to do.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. And yeah, I definitely learned more in the pub than I did in the classroom. So you're right there. So we're now moving on to our last segment of this evening. So we're ending tonight where we started, with a bar at Folies-Bergère. and I'm delighted to introduce everyone to Asifa Lahore and also her take on this work. So Asifa is Britain's first out Muslim drag queen, pushing the boundaries of what it means to be LGBTQ+, South Asian and Muslim. So Asifa came into the national spotlight in 2014 when she was censored by the Birmingham Central Mosque when discussing Islam and homosexuality on BBC Free Speech. Asifa has featured in Channel 4's groundbreaking documentary, Muslim Drag Queens, in 2015, which was actually narrated by Sir Ian McKellen and drew an audience of 1.1 million viewers, which is amazing. So Asifa continues to promote and DJ at London's top Gaysian club nights, Club Cali and Disco Rani. And in 2019, Asifa walked her first LGBTQ+ catwalk at Pakistan Fashion Week in London. Asifa is also passionate about disability rights, and her journey into the spotlight has been a deeply personal one, through which she discovered her transgender identity and continues being an active voice for intersectional Britain. So Asifa, can't actually see you just now. If you wanted to turn your camera and unmute. Hello, there you are.
Can you see me okay now?
Yeah, we can see you. So as you already know, I'm a massive fan of your work, and I've already watched your piece that we're going to share with everyone after we've had a quick chat. But my background is actually in theatre and history art, which I mentioned to Matt before, but specifically specialising in theatrical forms and artworks that were to do with the East, that were represented in Paris. So this ties really well into your work. And interestingly, Karen said that she touched on that in Manet's time there was renewed interest in other art forms from other cultures. So actually this led to a reinterpretation of things like the belly dance and fashions from places like India and Pakistan into bars and clubs like Folies-Bergère. So in many ways, I think what you've brought to us today is a really wonderful reframing of that homogenization of cultures that they did at the time when they kind of celebrated everything that was to do with what they saw as the imagined East as exotic at the time when this artwork was realized. So I was wondering if you wanted to say a little bit more about your decision to use your South Asian heritage as inspiration for this work.
Yes, I mean, being Britain's first out Muslim drag queen, I really do sort of take all my identities and just put them in front of my audiences. Now, one of my major, obviously, identities is being South Asian. And when it came to sort of, you know, producing work for yourselves, which, can I just say thank you so much for including me, it was a no-brainer. I wanted really to showcase my South Asian roots, but very much in a comedic fashion. I wanted to entertain and make people laugh, but also tie in with, in many ways, what's going on around the world at the moment. You know, we are isolated. There is this issue of race out there at the moment as well, with the Black Lives Matter movement. And I just wanted to take the opportunity, really, just to be proud of my South Asian heritage roots.
That's great. Yeah, no, it's something that I've thought about a lot in my life and in academia as well, is thinking about how certain identities can actually help facilitate, you know, and welcome sometimes the transgression of, you know, hierarchies. So it's really interesting that, yeah, you're saying that you're using this to fight that. So anyway, I also wanted to touch on the importance of drag and how as an art form it was traditionally been integral in spaces of socializing, so as entertainment, and also as somewhere to platform it. So I actually think of Vauxhall Tavern and places like Polo. Just as soon as I think of drag, that's what I think of. So I was wondering about how you're adapting to a world without spaces such as pubs, clubs and theatres. I imagine it's a really challenging time for your work.
It's been super challenging. I mean, I am itching to get back into, you know, the theatres, the clubs, the pubs, everything. I think most drag acts have just been forced online. And in many ways, I mean, I'm surprised that we didn't think of this before, of, you know, streaming or creating new content specifically for online platforms, whether it be our social medias, whether it be a streaming service. Obviously, taking my act online presents newer challenges, because you're restricted by the landscape, by the camera, as to what you can do. How, I've had to learn new ways of editing, new apps, for example. I've had to learn very quickly about lighting, which is super important for drag acts. I mean, with our makeup and all the, isms and all the different highlighters we use, like just having to learn all this technical jargon and really make it work, I think not only has allowed me to grow in terms of my art, but I think it just goes back to the tenacity of artists, of drag artists in particular. Throughout history, we've had to face so much adversity, and we've had to really create our own spaces and our own audience to perform. And this, I think, is our modern day form of adversity, where we're still continuing to work, but just using newer platforms and finding newer spaces.
Yeah, that's so true. And that also kind of leads into what I was going to ask as well, because I think that quite often pubs and clubs have the potential to become like really safe and powerful spaces for minority groups, kind of opening up access and to create art, and also to provide a supportive community to share that work in. Do you have anything to say about that?
I think, I think pubs and clubs definitely do allow, especially minority voices, to actually either create their own spaces, or, for minority communities to become part of the majority. I think, as a racial minority in Britain, the pub really wouldn't be my go-to area, neither would be the club, for example. But because of my queerness, and in order to sort of understand that and unpack that, it really did force me to go into the queer club and pub scene in my early 20s. And so I think, for me and for a lot of minority people, we've really had to adapt to, club spaces, to pub spaces, not only to sort of educate ourselves about our own identities, but also to create new spaces, because, I always go back to Club Carly and Disco Rani. They are very much spaces for, queer Bollywood lovers. And, when you have spaces like the Royal Vauxhall Tavern or GAY or Heaven, which are amazing spaces, they may not musically cater to, a certain audience. And I think that's really important to note here, is that pubs and clubs do give the freedom for people like myself, or minority voices like myself, to create newer spaces within them.
Oh, that's great. So I just wanted to the last thing I wanted to ask you about is the story behind your reinterpretation. I know it's quite personal what you've done. You've created a parody, so I was wondering if you could tell everyone a little bit about where you were coming from when you made this.
Sure. So obviously, being a drag act and being an entertainer, I just wanted to make people laugh. And my first job was actually working as a waitress in one of my dad's curry houses that was actually linked to the local pub. So it was essentially a big pub / restaurant that served curry with alcohol. And, that's, I really I enjoyed it on one hand, because I think my father was very much, unlike other local curry houses that didn't serve alcohol, he was very pro-alcohol. And at the same time, I hated working there. I absolutely hated working there, because at the weekends, or on Sundays in particular, I'd get a lot of drunk men leering at me, all sorts of whispers underneath their breaths every time I would come and serve them curry, or pour them an exotic wine. And at the same time, when I saw Manet's photo, I was just like, the subject, she just looked so unhappy. And it reminded me of those times of me working, as a waitress in the curry house. But I didn't want to make my piece sad. I actually wanted to entertain and made a parody out of it. And I just hope we can all have a giggle around it in true British drag fashion.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you again for creating this work. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. So now we're going to share the work with the audience.
When you're feeling hungry and cold, I will make you curry in a bowl. Chicken korma, the poppadoms are free. All you need is spicy curry. Colours of the world, every boy and every girl. People of the world, slam to the left. If you're having a good time, shake to the right. If you know that you feel fine, chilies at the front, go round. Slam to the left. If you're having a good time, shake to the right. If you know that you feel fine, chilies at the front, I see ya, hold tight. Welcome to the Lahore Tandoori. My name is Asifa Lahore. I will be your waitress today. La 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 la. Ding ding. La 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 la. And here's your menu. 2 chapatis for me and you. Aloo gobi, vindaloo, Maharaja, chutney queen, onion bhaji, and all that's in between. Colours of the world, every boy and every girl. People of the world, slam to the left. If you're having a good time, shake to the right. If you know that you feel fine, chilies at the front, go round. Slam to the left. If you're having a good time, shake to the right. If you know that you feel fine, chilies at the front, hi, see ya, hold tight. Flamingo lamada, chicken tikka masala. We moonwalk the foxtrot, spice up the salsa. Shake it, anga, shake it, anga arriba. Wait a minute, that ain't Indian. Colours of the world, every boy and every girl. People of the world, slam to the left. If you're having a good time, shake to the right. If you know that you feel fine, chilies at the front, go round. Slam to the left. If you're having a good time, shake to the right. If you know that you feel fine, chilies at the front, hi, see ya, hold tight.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Asifa. I don't entirely know how you follow on from that anarchic celebration of spicy food and global interaction. Look, it's our penultimate, the end of our penultimate episode of our summer term. I want to thank everybody who has taken part this evening: Karen, Florence, Matt, Asifa, and Layla, my co-host. Please sign up next week for our ultimate Open Courtauld Hour, which is a poetry special. And it's going to be hosted by Fern Inch and Layla Bumbra from the Reform team. So I'm looking forward to that one hugely. And connect with us via social media at Courtauld Res, using the hashtag Open Courtauld Hour, or not, if you don't want to talk to us about Open Courtauld Hour, just follow us and jump into the conversation thing. And I'm just going to end up by saying that if you want to stay in touch with the Courtauld and you're missing our gallery, especially after seeing Karen's wonderful talk about the Manet bar at the Folies-Bergère, then look up our Courtauld Gallery virtual tour, which you can probably most easily find by going to the Courtauld website at courtauld.ac.uk. But if you just Google Courtauld Gallery virtual tour, you'll get it that way as well. And it will take you back to the Courtauld Gallery the way it was before we shut for our Courtauld Connects transformation. So good night, everybody, and we'll see you next week, and enjoy the sunshine.